Clodagh, thank you so much. Clodagh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to have this opportunity, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined the session. I'm really chuffed that so many of you have chosen to join us in your busy lives. So thank you very much. So the topic for this session, I heard from Deloitte that one of the topics that was of interest for Impact Week was supporting early career and young leaders to develop their leadership skills. And that's exactly what I aim to do over the next 90 minutes or so. The science I present with practice can help you build self-awareness, adaptability, and taking meaningful action whilst growing your own authentic style. And most importantly, from my perspective, is looking after your own well-being. Now, I've got a few tips for you to support you in getting the most out of this. You might like to have a pen and paper handy, because I'll be inviting you to have a go at some stuff, so it might be useful. But that will be an invite, so don't worry if you don't fancy doing it. That's not a bother. As Clodagh said, you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording. And at the end of the slides, I've added some resources, things like books, podcasts, and clips, which you might like to delve into if you find what I'm going to share with you interesting. And just to be absolutely clear, we can't see you, unfortunately, we can't hear you, but you can engage with us, as you're already doing so beautifully, everybody. You can engage with us in the chat function to share your reflections and questions as we go along. So Clodagh who's one of the masterminds behind Impact Week from Deloitte, will also be keeping an eye on the chat and sharing a selection of your contributions. So we'll get to as many as we can. We might not get to them all, but we're grateful for anything you want to share with us. And I'll also aim to leave some space towards the end for extra questions. So I think we'll crack on. So as Clodagh said, I work for Seven, Psychology at Work, and our purpose is to enable positive change for people at work. It's our driving purpose. It's simple yet powerful, but it underpins everything we do. And that includes our work on leadership development with Deloitte. But I do have an alternative strapline for this presentation, which is this. We cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails. And for me, you can tell me if I got this right, but I think this represents the contexts in which you all operate. Because I think more than ever, the world is a really heady mix of people, behavior, events, and challenges. And my mission is to share practical skills, perspectives, and insights from behavioral science to help you be the person you'd like to be a bit more often at work and beyond. So whilst we cannot control all the things going on, we can flex ourselves, adjust our own sails, and maintain our unique authenticity. And that quote comes from one of the wisest women I know in public life, Dolly Parton. And I think it's just so true, and I think it captured part of what I wanted to share with you today. So let me just introduce myself a bit more. As Clodagh said, I'm a senior business psychologist at Seven, Psychology at Work. I've also got a role at City University of London, where I'm a visiting lecturer and researcher. I work alongside a leading academic in the field of behavioural science at work, and he's called Paul Flaxman, and I'm fortunate enough to work alongside him, designing, delivering, and researching interventions in the workplace. And I've been fortunate enough to share this science with a whole host of people in different workplaces, from charities to teachers to the National Health Service to hedge fund managers to a big organization you might have heard of called Diageo. And I also work with the main ballet companies in the UK with professional dancers. And the final point on there is I have my own podcast. Such as my mission to make this stuff more available to people is that I put my voice out there and interview super interesting people, again, aiming to make the science accessible to more people and more adults in the workplace. So I wanted to start, help us land well in this webinar. And I wanted to start just by talking to you a little bit about autopilot. And before I ask you a couple of questions, I just want to present this idea that we can spend quite a lot of our lives on autopilot. And what I mean by that is when my body is in one place, but my mind is off somewhere else. Like my mind might be thinking, oh, I wonder what's for my lunch today. And that's not always helpful if our mind is off somewhere else. But it's not always bad, but sometimes we can spend too much of our lives on autopilot and we might be missing out on stuff. So I wanted to invite you to reflect on a couple of questions. And here they are. If you want to have a reflect, please do. So have a think about your whole life, any area of your life, and think about one activity you tend to perform on that autopilot and another you tend to perform with more awareness. So just take a few moments to have a think about that. Something you do in your life that you kind of just, you've done it, perhaps you've done it a lot. Perhaps it's just something that's so habitual to you that you don't notice what's happening. And then one you perform with more awareness. And I'd love to take some examples from you. So if you want to write in the chat, that would be smashing. So let's start with autopilot. Anyone willing to share something you do in life on autopilot? Oh, can see some early driving, housework, mindlessly checking emails, washing the dishes, morning routine, brushing teeth, driving, getting kids organized, says Clodagh. Walking to the bus stop, brushing teeth, morning routine. The morning routine can be a lost in thought period. Wow. I'll keep looking. The never-ending story, housework. Oh, Burr. That I identify with this one so much. Questioning whether I have locked the door. Amen. I am with you 100% on that. I drive my husband nuts when I've left the house and we get to the end of the street and I go, did I lock the door? And I have to go back. Getting petrol, going to work. Right. I'm going to talk a bit about some of those examples, folks. Thank you so much. Scrolling on phone. I hear you, Denise. I saw quite a few that said driving. Now, isn't that a little bit alarming? That we can drive on autopilot. We can operate this piece of complex machinery whilst our mind's elsewhere. That's quite a nifty thing to do, if not a little bit alarming. I'd guess, I've asked a lot of people this question, I'd guess that on autopilot when you're driving, you're probably on a familiar route and you end up at your destination not really noticing what's passed you by because it's so familiar to you. But for those of you who put driving, do you remember when you first sat behind the wheel of a car? That sense of, right, there's mirrors, there's levers, there's all sorts going on. There's pedals, there's other road users. However am I going to be able to operate this piece of machinery? And now you can just rock it. You're just cruising around the streets of Ireland on autopilot. And maybe that's useful. Some others of you put the morning routine, getting the kids ready, a lot of you put housework. And sometimes that autopilot might be really useful. It's important for me to say I'm not knocking autopilot. Without autopilot, we wouldn't have great creativity, great literature, great art, great music, architecture. But sometimes that autopilot can overreach itself. Sometimes we can spend too much of our time in autopilot and we're missing out on stuff going on around us. There was a study done by Harvard, and they found that 46.9% of our waking hours is typically spent on autopilot. That's almost half of our time when we're awake. I'll give you an example from my life when I can veer over into autopilot. I I live in Spain, but I talk to my dad every day, who lives in Northumberland, where I'm originally from, and he lives alone. My mum passed away 4 years ago, and since then he's lived alone over the pandemic. And he's such a brilliant man, and I relish the calls with him every day. I really want to connect with him. And sometimes during those calls, I shift over onto autopilot going, yeah, yeah. And I'm not proud of this, folks. Let me be clear. I'm not proud, but Dad might be telling me something about the intricacies of village life, or maybe that the bins weren't collected. And my mind wanders off about things I've got to do, things on my to-do list. And that's not who I want to be with him. I want to cherish the moments I have with him every day, where he's connecting with me. And I'm also conscious that sometimes I might be the only person he's connected with in that whole day. So that's what I mean. If I'm on autopilot in that conversation with my dad, that's not the best version of Ross. That's not the best version of me. That's not how I want to be. So let's take some examples of activities you tend to perform with more awareness. Anyone willing to share that? Mandy has said walking. Thank you. Walking the dogs. Yoga, sports, playing an instrument, sports, watching football, maybe watching rugby too, folks. Working with children, meditation, gym, golf. Trying to be as present as possible when playing with the bubba. I love that. Calling my daughter, learning, says Tom. Crossing the street, always a good idea to be more aware then. Pilates, yoga. I love that. Driving for this, I turn down the music when I'm nearing my destination. Like, I can't listen to music and find my destination. You need to channel all your attention and energy into your surroundings. One-to-one meetings with my team, reading a novel. Do you see what I mean? There's two different states. Thank you so much, Colin. Love that. Sensory awareness in nature. Imagine if we're in nature and we're stuck inside our own heads, maybe fretting about work or catastrophizing about the future, if you're anything like me. So you see, we've got these two different states of mind. One, when we're on autopilot, and remember, I'm not knocking autopilot, but I'm just saying it's not always useful. And another where we've got more awareness, we're more aware of how we're showing up. And that's going to be a key theme of today for you as leaders. Thinking about you as leaders and how you're showing up. Right, thank you for that energy there, folks. Love that. And let's just touch on the agenda that I'd like to talk you through today. So the behavioral science, I want to talk to you a bit about that and the research. Quite briefly, I want to talk about my recommendation for the roles we adopt in this very webinar. I want to check in with you all. I want to talk to you about you as the leaders. And you might not feel like a leader, but I want to present my perspective on that. And then we'll dive into a practical exploration with something called the leadership life lens. So that's what I've got in store for the rest of the session. And please do keep engaging in the chat. As you'll see, I'm trying to keep up with it. I can't get to everything, but Claude is also supporting me on that. So it's the science bit. So science and research. Now, this isn't a science lecture, so I'm just going to talk about some of the key highlights from the research that show what this behavioral science can help us do and be in the workplace and in our whole lives. So this type of behavioral science has been shown to enhance our work and life effectiveness. It can improve your own well-being and your personal resilience, and it can help you develop skills to move towards what matters in life and work. And as I said right at the top, your well-being is one of the most important things to me in your whole work careers, because you need to be well to operate in the complex and at times challenging environments in which you work. And well-being is a really strong predictor of, firstly, well, of course, your own health, but the way you perform, your attendance, and the way you engage with work. So well-being is super important for me as a work psychologist. This evidence also helps you reduce rumination outside of work. What do I mean by that? Rumination. It's a good old word, but if you get home, and whether you're on your own, whether you're with family or with friends, but your mind's still at work, that's not a very healthy state for you or me, because our body doesn't know the difference and our body doesn't get any rest. So using skills like the ones I'm going to share with you can help you really disconnect from work and reduce that rumination. It can also give you a moment to pause this type of science. It can give you a moment to pause and help you consider what's important to you in your working lives, but also in any area of life, and recognize the potential barriers. So that's a little bit about the science. And I also want to talk about what I'd recommend for your stance in this workshop, because sometimes we're not always sure how we want to be. And in my head, what I imagine this workshop to be, this webinar to be, is like a workbench. I'm arriving at the workbench with a whole set of tools and perspectives and techniques. So think of this as a workbench. But what I'm not an expert in being is you. I'm not an expert in delivering your complex professional roles wherever you are. I'm not an expert in being you. So I'm bringing those skills to help you develop awareness, adaptability, and your well-being. And the stance I'd recommend for you and for me is kind of trying it on. I don't mean trying it on like trying it on. I mean trying it on like a pair of new shoes or something. So a stance of curiosity and experimentation. So that's the stance I'd invite you to adopt. And I'd like to check in with you all. We've got a question for you. And by the magic of Zoom and the even more magic of Cloda, I'd like to ask you a question about your level of energy. And the quiz has appeared for me. How would you rate your energy level today from 1 to 5? Where 5 is the maximum and 1 is the lowest possible energy level. I'll just give you a few moments to complete that. I can see, crikey, I can see over 100 people have already responded. I'll just let it go for a bit longer. Right. Okay, thanks. Thanks for giving this a go, folks. Right. I think we've got 80% of you have responded. This is entirely anonymous. So I wonder, Claudia, if we can end the poll and share the results. Is that possible? Right. Now, I don't know if you can all see the results, but I think you probably can. But what we've got there is about 48%. I'm getting some thumbs up. Thanks, folks. 48% of you are around a level 3 on energy, 22% at level 4, and 2% are feeling tickety-boo, maximum energy. And then level 2, 28%, and level 1 feeling the lowest possible energy level is 1% of people. So thanks so much for sharing that, folks. The reason I asked that question is because it just shows that there's a whole lot of different energy levels that we're bringing to work every day. And our energy level might change on a day-by-day basis or even an hour-by-hour basis. And it's important because if we've got a finite amount of energy, we need to think about where we're going to direct our attention. So I've got a follow-up question, which is just to put in the chat. But let's add a bit more texture to that question. So add a word or phrase to reflect how you're feeling today. Because feelings can also impact on how we're showing up at work. I'll read a few of them out. Overwhelmed, scrambled, positive, committed, motivated, busy, depleted, more tired than usual, curious, crikey, calm, excited, overwhelmed, sad, happy, tired, calm, drained, sluggish, anxious, content, eager, in pain, distracted, meh, overwhelmed, burdened, busy, tired and drained mentally, recuperating, excited, batteries charged, calm. Blimey. Hopefully you caught some of those words as I rattle through them. On the hamster wheel, drained, deflated. Thanks so much for sharing, folks. Hopeful. Look at that whole range of responses there. And when we're in our workplaces, there might be things going on for us and for everyone around us, feeling a different way every day, perhaps every moment of every day. And if we're feeling a bit overwhelmed, overburdened, deflated, or hopeful, busy but positive, it's just a thread that can connect us as human beings. Sometimes if we're feeling a bit low and overburdened and overwhelmed, we can think it's just us. But I think what this is showing is we're not alone. As humans, we go through a whole range of emotions, from excitement and elation to deflation and drained and overwhelmed. And it's just knowing that we all have these. And sometimes we might have really low days, really low periods in our lives. And sometimes we might be on the up a bit more. And all of those are absolutely fine. We don't need to feel we're broken if we're feeling overwhelmed or deflated. It's just how the human experience can be. So thank you so much for sharing that, folks, because I'm going to come back to that energy as we go along a bit. Because like I say, we haven't got infinite supplies of energy. So where we direct that, where we focus our attention, can be important as well. So I'm going to come back to it as we go into the next section, because I want to think about you as a leader. Some of you might not feel like a leader. Some of you might even feel like a bit of an imposter signing up for a session called Leadership Skills and Behavioural Science. Perhaps you feel you're not the right grade, or perhaps you just feel exhausted by the responsibility. Well, here's my perspective, folks. I consider you all to be leaders. I consider every one of you to be a leader. And I'll explain why. I'm going to explain why using two quotes. The first quote is from a fellow called Leif Erikson. And he said, this striking fella said, "We are all leaders, whether we want to be or not. There is always someone we are influencing, either leading them to good or away from good." So I love that. This is why I consider everyone in an organization to be a leader. We all have the opportunity to influence others. Which takes me on to the second quote. And this is from a psychologist, excuse me, called Albert Bandura. And he said, "Fortunately, most human behavior is learned observationally through modeling, from observing others." So hopefully you get what I'm getting at. You get my perspective. We learn through observing other people. That's the most effective way we learn our behavior. So people are watching us at work, whatever our status, whatever our grade, whatever's written down on a piece of paper. People will mirror what other people do. If I stretch that even further, it's like we're on the catwalk. We're leaders. You are leaders on the catwalk. People are looking to you for cues. How do we respond in a crisis? How do we communicate with each other? How do we treat each other? How do we treat the people we serve? So if you're one of those people who perhaps doesn't consider themselves to be a leader, it doesn't sit that comfortably, I recommend you try on the idea in a curious and experimental way for the rest of this workshop and maybe beyond, hopefully beyond. So folks, we've talked about you as a leader. Now let's have a think about the environment in which you operate. Because there are things in that environment that can help us, and there are things in that environment that can hinder us. So imagine you've decided how you'd like to be on the catwalk, and this is you. This little blob represents you in the nicest possible way. So you've decided how you want to show up, represented by this arrow. And around us, the stuff that can help and hinder us, represented by these stars. And there's also stars you see inside of us. So if you imagine that the helpful things, I'm just going to have a go at some live drawing here. Imagine that this, let me try another pen. Imagine that this star is really helpful. And so is that one. And imagine that this star inside of us, that maybe thought, emotion, memory, or sensation inside of us is really helpful to help us move towards that person we'd like to be. And then imagine the stuff that's not as helpful. Let's see if this works. So I'll shade them in red. These red ones aren't that helpful to us in our environment. And these red ones inside of us aren't that helpful either. So you see what we're doing? We're building up a picture. The stuff outside of us and stuff inside of us represented by those stars. There are two environments, if you like, at play. And we don't always notice that stuff going on, particularly that stuff inside of us. We don't always notice what's helpful and what's not helpful. In fact, the stuff that's not helpful can really get in the way. It can really capture our minds and leave us feeling a bit stuck and frustrated, perhaps. I'm going to unpack this a bit further. And I'm going to invite you to have a go at thinking about you as a leader, folks. So let me ask you a question. Thinking of, if you accept my perspective, just trying it on, you accept my perspective that you are a leader. What matters to you about how you show up as a leader? And I've asked these questions to hundreds of people, and I've got some examples here. What matters to you about how you show up? So I'm going to share with you some examples. Focused, open, industrious, honest. I can see some popping up in the chat as well. Collaborative, role model, calm, fun, inspirational, available, tenacious. Wow, I'm going to read some out from the chat too. This is fabulous, folks. Gosh, empathy, authenticity, communication, time and listening, emotional intelligence, respect for all colleagues in their specific situations, authenticity and compassion, which means being tough and honest too, authentic, genuine, respectful of others, caring and assertive, honesty, self-aware, treating people fairly, trustworthy, open and honest. Wow, showing empathy. Folks, what I'm going to do, hopefully if you can see the chat as well, you might get more ideas. But I'm going to invite you to select three or four of these qualities that really matter to you about how you show up as a leader. Just write them down on a piece of paper. I'm not going to ask I was going to say, I'm not going to ask you to share. Some of you are already being very kind and generous and sharing it already. You don't have to, but it's great if you do. So just jot maybe 3 or 4 or more if you want. I'd suggest 3 or 4 just to keep it focused. I can see a nice little few more here. Being available, being of service, empathy, inspirational, love that. Providing sound advice, authentic and honest, empathetic, emotionally intelligent, empathetic, authentic, focused, empowering. Crikey, wonderful words. I can see calm there, collaborative. So you jot down on a piece of paper your 3 or 4 or more. Things that really matter to you. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Right. So now, folks, I'm blown away by the words you've shared about what matters to you as a leader. And they're great words. And for me and for you, I know what's important about how we bring those qualities, what matters to you, how we bring that to life in our behavior, how we show up as a leader. Because there are things, I'm guessing, you can tell me, there are things that might get in the way, which takes me to my second question, which is this. What unhelpful stuff could show up inside of you that could interfere with you expressing what matters to you as a leader? And again, I'll share with you some examples. Because remember inside of us, remember those stars? The stuff that can show up that's unhelpful, like it'll all go wrong. I'm exhausted. I've got stuff going on outside of work. I'm anxious. I don't know what to do. Do I have to do everything around here? So I can see that the chat is going fabulously loopy. Let me just say. Negative self-talk, absolutely. Lack of confidence, stress, family drama, lack of sleep, fear, doubt. Thank you for sharing this, folks. This is super powerful that you're saying this. This is super powerful because look in the chat, folks. Lack of confidence. I'm so busy. Personality traits. Yeah, too critical of oneself. I hear you. Too critical. Pulled in too many directions, overworked, imposter syndrome, heck yeah. Anxiety, lack of sleep, frustration, not enough time. Lack of confidence, lack of support or quality of team. Perfectionism, that's an interesting one, thank you. Technology, too many emails, platforms, self-limitation, whoa. Frustration, perfection, stressed. Mam guilt, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm blown away. This is super powerful, folks, that you're all sharing this, because if we were in a room, we could almost have a look around the room. This is normal. Our minds produce stuff like this. Here's one, being narrow-minded when it comes to a specific subject. Agitation, waiting on someone else's support. So the reason I'm asking you to share this and to shine a bit of a light on this unhelpful stuff is because that unhelpful stuff can get in the way. That can get in the way of you being the best version of you, you being the person you really want to be. What do I mean? I can see a couple more I'm going to read out, folks. People pleasing. Hello, yes. Identify with that. Pulled in too many directions. Fighting. Hang on. Fighting the nearest fire. Love the way you've described that, Tad. Thank you. So let me explain what I mean. You know, I talked earlier about your attention and energy. In the last two questions, we've looked at what matters to you. And I've got some examples on this. So say what matters to you, for example, is being tenacious, focused, calm, and being a role model. This is like two sides of the same coin, because on the other side of that coin is this. It'll all go wrong. I don't know what to do. I'm anxious. Now, so on one side of the coin, you have what matters to you as a leader. On the other side, we have that unhelpful stuff that our minds produce. And it's entirely normal that our minds do produce that stuff. What it is, it's the way our minds have evolved. Our minds are trying to protect us. But it's not always a helpful thing. My question to you, just to reflect on, is where would you like to focus your attention and your energy? Would you like to focus it on being tenacious, focused, and calm, and a role model, for example? Or would you like to devote your energy to, it'll all go wrong, I don't know what to do, I'm anxious? Where would you like to devote your attention and your energy? To what matters, or to that unhelpful stuff? Because I know, I'm pretty sure, I'm confident in saying this, that quite often our attention and our energy is really drawn by this stuff, that unhelpful stuff. We often treat this unhelpful stuff as if it's 100% true and 100% worthy of our full attention. And it means we're not thinking about how we show up, because all our attention and our energy is focused on that unhelpful stuff, and that can then influence how we show up. So hopefully that's making some sense, folks. I'm going to just pause, partly for a sip of tea, but partly in case anyone's got any questions. Thank you. And I can see Finn saying, like to focus on the positive side of the coin. Yeah, those qualities, thinking how you'd like to be in this situation. Because at work, you also go through a whole host of different situations. You can go through situations where you need to be talking to someone one-to-one. Maybe you go through having a difficult conversation with a colleague or someone who uses your service. And maybe you're speaking to a team meeting, all sorts of things. And we don't always have the time to pause and think how we'd like to show up. And as Joe says so beautifully there, so often we forget that this is a choice. Wow. I'm going to repeat that because I love it. So often we forget that this is a choice. We're on autopilot and we're just lured away. We're lured away by that stuff that's quite captivating, that everything is going to go wrong. I'm anxious. I don't know what to do. And I'm not belittling that stuff, because as I say, that unhelpful stuff, it's what our minds are designed to do, protect us. And I'm not asking you to share them with me because I'm cruel. I'm asking you to share them with me because a bit later on, I'm going to show you some skills that can help us change our relationship with that stuff on the right-hand side. And another lovely contribution here in the chat, folks. A good reminder to focus on what you do well and what you value. Too easy to get mired in the swirl of worry. Beautiful words there, Edel. Thank you. Mired in the swirl of worry. I like that phrase. I think I'm gonna nick it. And while we're on that, I can see a question in the Q&A. Interesting. How to manage your energy levels if your manager, boss, leader is not supporting your energy levels. Tricky one. Because I don't have a magic answer for that. But I would say that the only thing we can control is how we show up. And perhaps that means the energy could be devoted to having a conversation with that manager, boss, or leader, to share with them the impact that they're having on you. And I don't say that flippantly or lightly at all, because I know that can be enormously daunting. But we can't control what they do or their energy levels. So perhaps, and this is a whole another webinar, folks, but finding ways to have those difficult conversations and thinking about how we want to be in those conversations, even though things might be showing up inside of us like, oh, my boss is going to kick off. They're going to think I'm not capable. But finding ways to have those conversations in a way that's authentically us can be a way to perhaps move forward with small steps on that. I hope that goes some way to responding to that. But please feel free to respond as well. Yeah, someone else has said how to deal with colleagues who sap your energy and lead you to the negative side of the coin. Again, it's similar. Is there a way we could distance ourselves more from those colleagues? Or is there a way we could explain the impact that they're having on us? They might not be aware of that impact. They might be well aware of it. They might not. But what I want to do, thank you for the question. I'll come back to those a bit later on. But what I want to do is present to you a tool. This tool I've called the Leadership Life Lens. Let me explain what I mean. This can help us explore what's going on inside our heads and how that can influence how we then show up in the world. And it's important to say this is a tool for every area of life. This is a lens we can look through in every area of our lives. So it's for you as a leader, it's for you at work, and there's also you outside of work. This lens can be used across our whole lives to help us sort out what's going on in our heads. It can help us get perspective, help us notice how we're showing up, what's going on around us, the impact we're having on people around us, the impact we're having on ourselves. It also helps us to recognize the habits that maybe once were productive for us, but have now become less useful and less helpful. Because we tend to perform them on autopilot, we don't always notice them. So it's good to bring them into our awareness. So this leadership life lens can help us notice and, really importantly for me, extend some compassion and kindness to ourselves. In a nutshell, it can help us be the leader and the person we'd like to be a bit more often. So here it is represented in a photo, that lens that we can look through. We can use it to look through the road ahead or the challenge we're facing, or we can use it to look back on instances in our life, incidents, to think how we showed up and other things to learn from that. So it's a really, how would I describe this? I think it's a really useful tool. I think it's a really understandable tool. That's my job. So hopefully you'll find this understandable. So let me present it to you, this leadership life lens. And if you want to try, you could actually draw this on a piece of paper. Basically, if you draw a vertical line down the middle of a sheet of paper and then a horizontal line all the way across, so you create 4 segments, a bit like what I'm about to show you. So this leadership life lens can be used in any context in life, whether you're thinking about your own health, you as a leader, maybe you're thinking about your leisure time, how you want to be in your leisure time. Maybe you're thinking about your work. And what it does is it helps us sort our experience as a human into 2 dimensions. So in any scenario in life, here's my Here's my proposition to you folks. This is one of the dimensions. In any situation in life, we can move towards who we'd like to be, or we can move away from who we'd like to be. Sometimes I will show up as the best version of Ross. Sometimes I will show up as a version of Ross that I'm pretty embarrassed by, pretty cringy. And we'll always do both. That's part of being a human being. We will always do both. But we don't always notice. That's the key. That's the key. We don't always notice when we're being the best version of me, or when I'm being the cringy version of me, the one that's a bit of an idiot. And then there's another dimension, which is represented by the horizontal line. And there's stuff going on in our inner world, and we're going to focus on the inner world first. But if you want to have a go yourself, as I say, take a piece of paper and divide it into 4. So a line vertically down the center of the page and a line horizontally across the middle of the page. So you create 4 different quadrants. But for now, we're going to focus on the inner world. Okay, so I've got some questions to ask. And these questions, folks, will be familiar. So the first question in that top left is, what matters to you about how you show up as a leader? What's important? And the question down in the bottom left is, what unhelpful stuff could show up inside of you? Things like thoughts, emotions, memories, and urges that could interfere with expressing what matters. And you'll notice, with a bit of luck, that they're the questions I've just asked you. So if you'd like to write in the top left those things that were important to you about how you show up as a leader, your personal things. I'm going to put some in from me. I've put for me, what matters to me as a leader is being focused, kind, fun, and courageous. They are some of the qualities that really matter to me as a leader. They're important about how I show up for other people. And I'd like to invite you to write yours in that top left, and then come down to the bottom right. And you've also already answered this question. So if you just add that unhelpful stuff that could show up inside of you there in that bottom left. I've put some examples from me. I'm not a leader. I'm tired. It won't work. Will the goalposts ever stop moving? It's not my blooming responsibility. So that's some of the unhelpful stuff that shows up inside of me. So I'll just give you a moment to write that down in yours if you want to have a go. That's my invitation to you, to have a go at playing with this thing called the leadership life lens. So I'll just give you a moment to fill in both of those quadrants. Okay. So what I want to show you is the next stage of this leadership life lens, because I want to have a look at that inner world stuff and see how that impacts on us in the world, what I've called the world of behavior. This means basically how you're showing up in the real world. This is how other people could observe you. And there's a couple of question prompts here. Oops. So let's look, first of all, at this stuff at the bottom left. This stuff here, whatever you've put at the bottom left, then think about, what might you do when under the influence of that unhelpful stuff? How might you show up in the real world under the influence of that unhelpful stuff? And I've got my examples in here. You would see me being withdrawn. You'd see me being grumpy. Not a particularly nice person to be alongside. You'd see me withdrawing, like not getting involved. You'd see me thinking, oh God, I'm going to have a biscuit. Maybe another biscuit. Maybe a bag of crisps too. And you'd see me maybe, I'm not proud of this, you'd see me maybe complaining to other people. So that's what I would do if I was under the influence of that stuff at the bottom left. So my invitation to you folks is to have a go. Have a go at writing in that bottom right what you might do if you were under the influence of your stuff at the bottom left. I'll just leave you a few moments to write that down. I'm not going to ask you to share this. You might want to. Because this is the stuff, you see, this is the stuff that's taking us away from the best version of myself. The Ross who is withdrawn, grumpy, eating biscuits, packets of, and complaining, isn't the best version of me. But just take a few moments to reflect, pause and reflect openly about how that unhelpful stuff could show up in your behavior. Okay. Thank you, folks. So let's have a look at the top right. Sorry, excuse me, the top left. So remember those things that matter to you as a leader. In the top right here, what could you do to move towards expressing what matters? And this might include things you already do, but what else could you do to move towards expressing what matters? My top tip here is think of small things. So I put some examples from my life in. Something I still sometimes forget to do, plan out my week and prioritize. Reset my one-to-one meetings. Make them an arena where I can truly listen and think about who's going to take action. Who's going to commit to take action at the end of those meetings? Maybe I ask the team for feedback. And maybe I have that conversation that I've been putting off with someone, whether it be a team member, a peer, or whether it be someone senior to me. So just try and get down in that top right some of the things you could do to really bring to life what matters to you about how you are as a leader. I'll just leave a moment's pause for you to just have some space to do that. Great. Okay, so if you have been having a go, let me just tidy this up a little bit and just show you that bit in the middle. That noticing with kindness, noticing with curiosity and kindness. This is the core skill at the heart of the leadership life lens. You see, I often think when I'm doing this exercise for myself, because I use this tool a lot in my working life, I often think I'm kind of sorting out the jumble that's going on in my head. And it just helps me get more clarity and identify for me what would be the towards move for me in the next moment. What things can I do to really move me towards what matters to me? Even when that stuff at the bottom is showing up. Because I just want to show you a couple of features of this tool, if I may. Because sometimes people say to me, in fact, someone said this to me quite recently, oh, I love this tool, Ross. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on this stuff up here. I don't need to look at the stuff down there. because I've got what's important to me, and I've got how could I move towards expressing what matters. I don't need to look at that stuff down there. And I said, well, okay, give it a go, because my view is that if we're ignoring this stuff down here, we're ignoring the stuff that could derail us, that could get in the way, that could mean we're showing up as not the best version of ourselves. And I want to talk too about that noticing with curiosity and kindness a bit more. Super important, because often I'm guessing that you folk out there, sometimes you're your own harshest critic. You wouldn't speak to yourself. Sorry, you wouldn't speak to the people closest to you in the same way that you speak to yourself. I'm guessing that sometimes you're quite harsh, you're quite persistent, maybe sometimes you're even dismissive and aggressive with the way you talk to yourself, and critical. So we're looking to develop this stance towards yourself of curiosity and kindness. I'm hoping I might get the chance to show you another one of these as we go along. But what I want to do now is I want to focus on this stuff, because this is the stuff that can really get in the way, this unhelpful stuff. As I said, it's entirely natural to have this stuff, entirely normal. We're not broken if we're experiencing this stuff inside of us, but it can drain our energy and attention. We can get really tangled up in it. So I want to share with you a metaphor about this stuff in the bottom left. And stay with me, because this metaphor is called the passengers on the bus. And I want to talk you through it. I want to have a go at talking through it for you. So the idea is that we are our drivers of the bus of our lives. Or if you want to call it your leadership bus, take a seat in that driving seat. Turn on the ignition and start moving forward. And hopefully you can move forward in a direction that has meaning and purpose for you. You can really think about how you want to show up as a leader. Okay? And that might sometimes mean taking new avenues. And the moment we start moving forward, there's lots of chatter starts up behind us. The passengers on the bus start piping up and giving us their opinions and their thoughts. And some of those passengers are just like quite mundane day to day. They're saying, oh, don't forget, we need to buy bananas when we go shopping later. And you need to make a call to that person who's on your to-do list, and you need to respond to that email. And, oh, look, there's the supermarket. So they're just quite mundane, those passengers. Some passengers are quite nice. They're saying to me, hey, Ross, it's great to be on your bus. I love it. The seats are really comfortable and you're a great driver. And the passengers know what we're thinking in advance. So the passengers could be saying to me, hey, Ross, I can see you thinking of going down a new direction, making an adjustment to how you are, really living what's important to you, really being what matters. And we think that's going to go really well for you, Ross, and we think you're going to end up in a really good place. You've got all the strengths and the skills you need. So go for it, mirror signal maneuver. And some passengers aren't as helpful. Some are saying to me, Ross, don't really like being on your bus. Seats are a bit uncomfortable, mate. And we can see you're thinking of going down this new avenue in your life, doing this new stuff. Well, actually, what we know is that where you feel most comfortable is on that circular route, round and round the city. Just keep going on that circular route, because we know deep down that's where you feel safe and comfortable and protected. You might see other people taking new avenues and going off all over the place, but you know deep down that's not for you, Ross. You need to stay on the safe and the circular route around the city, the one that's familiar to you. And some of the passengers are saying, Ross, you're a really shit driver. Have you even got a license for this vehicle? Because you wouldn't know it the way you drive. And we too can see you're thinking of going down this new avenue in life. Well, really? Really? Do you really want to take your bus down there? Because we know what's going to happen. We know there's going to be a series of unfortunate events ending in utter catastrophe. And that's the metaphor, folks. Don't know if it resonates with anyone. But as we're going about our daily existence, there's lots of chatter going on. There's lots of noise going on in my head. And sometimes that noise can be helpful. And sometimes it can be less helpful. Sometimes it can be quite brutal and critical and cruel. And guess what? Don't know about you folks, but I pay more attention to those nasty, critical passengers than I do to the ones going, hey man, you've got this. And that's the way the human mind is wired. We have biases to look at the negative stuff. It's what's helped us become so successful as a species. We've evolved from very cautious ancestors. So we're not broken if we're having these thoughts. They're entirely normal. And sometimes what we need is ways to change our relationship with these thoughts. Now, just have a look at me on the screen for a minute, in wherever I am. Have a look at my hands here, because the techniques I'm about to show you are like this. So if you've got this hand here is me, that I'm waving, and this hand here is my unhelpful thoughts, memories, emotions, sensations. Now, sometimes we're like this. We are like glued together. In my game, we call it being fused. We are absolutely fused with that unhelpful content of our minds. And the more we struggle with it, the tighter that gets. But what I'm about to show you are techniques just to help us get a bit of space between ourselves and those unhelpful stuff in my head. See that space there? Where can I show you? That space between my two hands when my thumbs are wiggling there. That's some of the healthiest psychological space we can have as a human being. Okay. And what I'm about to share with you is some simple skills from evidence-based research to help us get a bit more distance between ourselves and those unhelpful thoughts. So let's have a go. Right. So staying with the bus, what we can do is write it down. Imagine that we're trying to write down what our passengers are saying. And my ask for you here, my invitation for you here is keep these to the everyday familiar things that your passengers might say, not the deepest, darkest things our passengers say, because we're not in the right space to address those. This is the everyday things. Let me give you some examples. So things like, these are mine, it won't work. What will people think? That shows up a lot for me. What will people think of me? I'm not clever enough. That shows up a lot. And I'll be discovered. And when I say I'll be discovered, I don't mean like I'll be discovered as the next singing sensation. I mean I'll be discovered as the fraud and the charlatan that I am. So if you want to have a go at this, my invitation is on a bit of paper. You don't need to draw a boss, but just jot down some of your own unhelpful everyday thoughts. Not those deepest, darkest ones, but those ones similar. You get the idea from the ones I've shared, hopefully. Just write them down on a piece of paper. I'll give you a moment to do that. I'll just have another sip of tea and give you a moment to jot some of those down. Sometimes when you start writing these, if you're anything like me, then you can't stop. But my question for you folks is, what's it like? What's it like to see those thoughts out there on the page? Has anything changed? What's it like to look at them out there on the page? If anyone's willing to share in the chat, that would be amazing. Any difference, you know, to seeing them out there? So we're getting some thoughts in here. So surprising, they are ridiculous. They lose their power. Clarifies your thoughts, allows you to challenge them. It's not as scary. This is tremendous. I love the way you're expressing this, folks. I can manage them. It looks harsher to see it written down compared to when you say them in your head. I'd never say these to others. Ain't that the rub, eh? That others are feeling the same, you're not alone. Absolutely. Can see the separation. Oh my goodness. Can see the separation between self and thoughts. Thank you, Colin. Thoughts are not us. If I didn't have a mic that I'm quite protective of, I'd drop it right now. Thoughts are not us. Thank you, Colin. They're so negative, so limiting. But sometimes they're just doing a job on us. They're just working their, I wouldn't call it magic, but they're working their influence inside our heads. They're trapping us. We're getting tangled up with these very thoughts. And by writing them down, we can start to get some of that, see my thumbs wiggling? We can start to get some of that magic distance between ourselves and our thoughts. That's one technique based in evidence. I want to give you another couple of techniques, folks. Getting some healthy distance. So this is a different technique. And my invitation to you is to write down one of your own unhelpful thoughts at the right-hand side of a piece of paper, giving yourself space on the left-hand side, as on this slide, because we're going to write something in front of it. So write down one of your own unhelpful thoughts. I've written down one of mine. I'm not clever enough. Just have a look at that. I'm having a look at it out there on the slide. Just think about how that limits you. There's a comment there that that's so limiting. Yeah, that can limit me in my life. It can limit me in my work life, every area. So here's the technique, folks. Try putting in front of that, I'm having the thought that I'm not clever enough. So try writing that down on your piece of paper. I'm having the thought that I'm not clever enough. I'm having the thought that, and whatever your unhelpful thought is. Now, folks, has anyone noticed anything different there? Anything changed? Maybe it's worse, maybe it's better, but anything at all. It's not a feeling now, it's more positive. It allows distance, feels lighter. It's not me, it's my thoughts. Its power is removed. You begin to question the validity of the thought. It puts it in perspective. It's just that. It's a thought. It's recognizing a thought. Relief, it's not a reality, it's a thought. Oh, some great contributions here. Thank you so much, folks. It's transitory. Describe the thought rather than a central truth about oneself. Amen. It's a thought, it's transient. Yeah. Super useful technique, I would say. I'm having the thought that I'm not clever enough. We could even take it a step further, folks, if you want to have a go. How about this? I noticed that, you can try this on your bit of paper. I noticed that I'm having the thought that I'm not clever enough. And that does for me, I don't know if it's the same for you, but what that does for me is it makes it even, you know what? You see, I've just sat up there and my shoulders back. It makes me feel like a weight has been lifted. I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm not clever enough. I'm even smiling. It just feels less of a weight around my neck. Sometimes we treat these unhelpful thoughts as if they're 100% true and 100% worthy of our full attention. Anyone else get similar thing? A bit more distance, perhaps? Yeah, I can see some thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Okay, and I've got one more. One more thought. It's only words. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Thank you, Grace. It's only words. And words have power. And if those words are rattling around in our heads unchecked, then they could be having quite an influence on us. So that's why I invite you to access these words, because they might just be operating under the radar. Yeah, and Bear's saying, I'm nodding along when you said about sitting up taller. And Sarah says it dilutes the feeling. Brilliant stuff. I want to share with you one more technique. And this is a question. So quite often, and we're working with that same thought, I'm not clever enough. Quite often, folks, we can ask ourselves, is it true? And I don't know about you, but what happens for me in this case is this. My mind goes, no, it's not true. Remember when you did that and it worked really well and people understood where you were coming from, your perspective. And then immediately my mind will produce something here. Yes, it's true. Remember when you gave that talk and you looked like an utter idiot? Is it true? No, but remember when you did that thing and people thought you'd presented well? Ah, but yes, it is true. You're rubbish. You're no good. And it's like a little courtroom drama going on in my mind with prosecution and defense. And all that time, I'm stuck inside my own head because I'm tangled up with that question, is it true? A different way I'd suggest we could look at it, a different question we could ask ourselves is this. I'm noticing I'm having that thought. I'm not clever enough. Is it helpful? Is it helpful? And that addresses a question in the chat, which says, question in the chat says, yes, but the negative words are probably true though. But the negative words are probably true. But are those negative words helpful? Maybe not in the environment I'm in. Do you get what I mean? Because if we're asking, is it true? We can get tangled up in that inner courtroom compelling drama where I'm stuck inside my own head. If I can get that distance and say, okay, McIntosh, is it helpful where I am right now to be having that thought? No. For me, that can help me get some distance. So what I'd like to do is start to just move towards a bit more question time. So I think if you've got any questions, I want to talk to you a little bit about noticing. Because remember, at the heart of the leadership life lens is that noticing with kindness and curiosity. Because we know that the human mind is a time traveler, and we can spend a lot of time not experiencing the here and now. And there's something that can help us develop our noticing skills called mindfulness. And I almost think mindfulness has become damaged by its own popularity. People have got the wrong end of the stick sometimes, or sometimes people are doing really slick marketing and not describing the essence of mindfulness. Because for me, mindfulness is a form of mental training. We might take exercise to look after our bodies, whether we do some light stretching, some yoga, Pilates, go to the gym, but we don't always look after our minds in the same way. Mindfulness is like waking up from the autopilot. And it's like gathering the scattered mind. Do you ever have that sensation the mind is all over the shop or being pulled in all those different directions? Practicing this can really help us gather that scattered mind and allow us to focus. Now, folks, I want to leave some time for questions. So I do have another example of the Leadership Life Lens, but I also took the precaution of recording it before today. So when you get the slides, you'll see there's a link to that. And it's me talking about my own self-care using that Leadership Life Lens again. But I want to move us on to kind of bringing this all together. And there's a quote that really encapsulates that for me. And it's a quote from a psychologist called Viktor Frankl. And he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So we don't always, someone said in the chat earlier, we don't always realize we have a choice about who we're going to be, how we're showing up. And there's always a choice. And Viktor Frankl is especially significant for me and for a whole heap of other people. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian neurologist, and he was also a Holocaust survivor. He'd had every human freedom taken away from him, yet he still recognized that there was space to choose how he responded. And because I like lots of quotes, I had a final thought, which was this: you may not always have a comfortable life, and you will not always be able to solve all of the world's problems at once. But don't ever underestimate the importance you can have, because history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own. And that's from Michelle Obama. So I've got a couple more things to show you, but before I do that, I just wanted to come to any more questions folks might have. I think we've got about 8 minutes left. So any questions anyone would like to ask? You can pop them in the Q&A function, or you can pop them in the chat. I'll just talk a bit more whilst people are maybe composing. But just to recap, what I've tried to do with this little session is give you a taste of this behavioral science. Gives you a taste of these evidence-based simple skills that I don't think we were always taught as, well, I certainly wasn't taught them in my youth or in any of my education. Skills that can help us really connect with what matters as a human being, move towards what matters, and relate to that unhelpful stuff differently. If I could recommend one book or resource, what would it be? Fabulous question, Colin. I would recommend a book. Let me just see. Which ones I got the details of. I would recommend a book, and I'll make sure it's in the resources, a book called The Happiness Trap by a guy called Ross Harris. He's an Australian psychologist, and he really brings to life this type of behavioral science in a way. I'll make sure that's added if it's not already in the notes. Another book, which definitely isn't in the notes, but it's on my mind, is a book by a colleague of mine in America called Dr. Jill Stoddard. And she's just released a book called Imposter No More. And she's using the same behavioral science that I've shared a bit of with you today to address that sensation that we all can have about feeling a bit like a fraud, a bit like an imposter. So I'll add that as well to the notes. And if it doesn't sound too big-headed, I'd also recommend my own podcast, People Soup, because, for instance, that Jill Stoddard, I've interviewed her for the podcast, and that will be coming in the next few weeks, that episode. So I want to also get your feedback before everyone leaps off. So still time for questions, folks, but I'm going to see if we can launch another poll. So you've invested your time in joining me and your energy in joining me and your attention. I'd love to know how you found this. How useful has this webinar been for you? Where 5 is extremely useful and 1 is not at all useful. It helps us. It helps me improve these. I can see Marie Holton has her hand up. I can't put you on mic, Marie, I'm afraid. So if you want to ask a question, please pop it in the chat or in the Q&A. Right. Let me just have a look at the stats. So let's have a look. Let's share those. Let me share those stats. So how useful has this webinar been for you? 46% have found it extremely useful, 4% a bit less, 38% useful, 38%, 14% around the middle, and a couple have found 1% at a rating of 2 and 1% at a rating of 1. I'm sorry it hasn't hit everyone's mark. I'm very grateful you still stayed with it. And hopefully there's something to reflect on here for you all, to think about you as leaders and how you're showing up. So hopefully you've enjoyed this taster. Thank you for your comments in the chat. Really appreciate you investing your time and your energy in joining me. Oh, what's my podcast called? It's called People Soup. And I didn't prompt Sinead to ask me that. People Soup, Sinead. Available on all good podcast platforms. All right. Well, I think we'll draw it to a close there, folks. Is that okay to close it now, Clodagh? Any final words from you?
No, just to say a massive thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. And you've given people so many tools that they can apply, you know, in their own personal life and in work life as well. So thank you so much. It's really insightful. And I know a lot of people will be tuning into People Soup after today. So for more of what you have to say. So thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated. As I mentioned at the start, in case anybody missed it, we will have the recording and Ross's slides available towards the end of next week through Business in the Community. If you do have a question that you didn't get to ask today that you'd like to get to Ross, in the Zoom invite that you received for this webinar, there'll be an email address. You can pop it into that email address and I'll make sure that Ross gets it.
Ah, that's brilliant. Thanks so much, Clodagh. And Clodagh, thanks for all your support in helping me bring this to life. And thanks to Deloitte for the opportunity. Really grateful for that and for everyone who showed up. Thank you so much, folks.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for attending, and thanks a million again, Ross.
Cheers.
Bye all.
Bye.